Hello, and welcome to this presentation on keys to success in education and in math. My name is Katelynd Adams, and I work here at SUU in the math department, teaching pre-algebra and algebra courses, developmental math. I've actually been an employee at SUU since 2008 when I was earning my bachelor's degree in math education. During that time, I was a tutor. I worked as a tutor in the tutoring lab and a teacher's assistant for math department courses. After I graduated, I was hired as a part-time developmental math instructor, and then by 2014, I was hired on full-time as a developmental math instructor here at SUU. On the right, you will see my family. I have 4 wonderful kids. They turned 6, 8, 10, and 12 this year. And my husband and I have been married for 12 years. I thoroughly enjoy my job here at SUU, and I am looking forward to sharing some tips that I have learned through the years regarding teaching students and most specifically teaching math. So today, a couple of things that we are going to cover. We're going to go over metacognition, which is a term that was coined this year, and sorry, that's not this year. Okay, you can go back. All right, so a couple of things I want to go over in our presentation today. We are going to talk about metacognition, brain science, the difference between fixed and growth mindset, and the power of mistakes. So before I dive in, I want to be sure and give appropriate credit for the information and ideas I'm about to share with you. A lot of the material that I'm going to present actually came from a conference that I attended, a Teaching for Learning conference at Nevada State College in 2018, where I met Dr. Sandra McGuire. And here at this conference, she actually gave me a copy of her inspiring book. It's entitled Teaching Students How to Learn. During her keynote address and throughout her book, Dr. McGuire gives some really wonderful insights into keys to success in education, and I'm going to share some of those with you today. She also wrote a companion book addressed specifically to students, and it's titled Teach Yourself How to Learn. So the first thing I want to do is give you a reflection question. So since this presentation is being recorded rather than with a live audience, I want to give you a minute to reflect on this question and consider what you think might the difference be, if any, between studying and learning. So I want you to think for a minute what you might consider the difference between those two is. And I've actually shared parts of this presentation with my students live in class, and I've asked them this question and taken several responses as to what they think the difference is between studying and learning. So I'm going to share with you some of their responses. So when I asked them what they felt like studying is, some of the things that they mentioned were memorizing. They might have said that studying is short-term, studying is tedious, and studying is focusing on the whats. When I asked them, okay, what does learning then mean to you? Some of the things that they said were understanding the material rather than just memorizing it. They said that learning is long-term and where studying is short-term. When they're learning, it's actually engaging and fun rather than tedious, and they feel like they're just going through memorization. And they also said that learning to them focuses on the how, why, and what if, rather than just the what's. So I'm wondering if any of those things ring true with what you might have considered the difference between studying and learning. My second reflection question for you is, if I were to ask you, now I was told that a lot of you are aspiring educators, so if you think about your future students and you were to ask your students, which of the following tasks do you think that they would work harder on or put in more effort for? The first one is you would tell them you have to get an A on the next test. So do everything you can to make sure that you get an A. The other task is, at the end of the chapter, you're going to ask your students to come up to the class and teach the material. So they are required to give the material to the rest of the class. So the question is, which one of those tasks do you think your students are going to work harder for? To make that A on the test, or to prepare for that presentation to the rest of the class? So I'm thinking that a lot of you are probably guessing most students, when I asked them this question, they said they would prepare harder for the presentation that they had to give in class. If they were asked to teach that material, that is something they would put in a lot of effort for, even more than trying to get a specific grade on a test. And I'm guessing that you would probably think the same thing. And here's a couple of reasons why. When you are asked to teach material to someone else, you are really required to understand that content, not just memorize some facts and be able to recite those, but you really need to understand what it is you're going to be teaching. You also need to prepare for questions. When you're teaching material, you're going to get questions from students, and you don't know what those questions are, so you need to prepare for anything they might ask. And also, one thing that they tell me when I ask my students this question, if they were preparing to teach, how would they feel? A lot of them are really nervous about doing something like that, and they really don't want to appear dumb in front of their peers. They want to look like they know what they're talking about, so they're going to really prepare hard to teach the students in the class. One thing you might consider here is, have you ever started explaining something to someone and you're going through the details and you're starting to explain it, and then all of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't understand this material as much as I thought I did. And that's usually what happens if we start talking through the material. It's then that we can really understand that maybe there's some things I need to keep researching because I don't really understand the whole concept. So that's the great thing about preparing to teach someone. And that's going to be one of the wonderful tips that we can give our students when they are preparing for the test. If they can prepare that material like they have to teach it, they're going to understand it a lot more. So on this next slide, you can see the two main tips that I've covered so far. And that first one is, if we can have our students stay in learn mode rather than that study mode. Sometimes students get so caught up in the study mode and just memorizing information that when it comes to test time, they really don't understand the concept. And if a question asks about application of that content, they're going to have a harder time. So it's important to stay in learn mode, something that we can utilize later and really apply those concepts. And then that second thing is to study the material as if you have to teach it to someone. So whether that is grabbing a family member or a friend, or pretending that you have someone that you can teach to, giving that material in a lecture type where you can really decide if you understand fully before you are tested on it. So let's talk about what is metacognition. Metacognition is defined as the ability to think about your own thinking, to be consciously aware of yourself as a problem solver. You're asking yourself, do I really understand this topic? And you're able to monitor, plan, and control your mental processing. Am I just memorizing the material, or is this really something that I can teach to someone else? And having metacognitive skills is also related to being able to judge your level of learning. And when I talk about your level of learning, I'm referring to Bloom's taxonomy. And I'm wondering if you've ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy before. So metacognition is also being able to know what you know and what you don't know, so that you can then ask yourself more questions and do more research from there. So I'm going to do a little experiment. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you a series of words and phrases. And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. And I want you to go through the list and count all of the vowels that you see within all of the words or phrases. So for our purposes, we're looking for A, E, I, O, U. You're going to try to count all of those vowels throughout the slide and see if you can get how many there are total. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm hoping you had a chance to go through the list and count as many vowels as you think there are. So now that you've done that exercise, my question for you is, how many words or phrases do you remember from that list? Now, I do the same experiment with my students, and at this point, when I ask them how many of those words or phrases they remember, a lot of them can't remember any of them. Some will remember a couple, and at most they will remember 4, maybe 5. So let's say that you did really well and you could recount 5 of those words on the list. If you were to do that, there's 15 total on that list. So if you got 5 of them, that gives you a 40% on the test. Only remembering 5, and that's not really a great score on your assessment. So you're not in a good position to pass the class. So let's do a retake. Let's see if you can try this time and get a better score. Now that you know what you're looking for, instead of counting the vowels, I want you to look at the words and see if you can remember the words. Now I usually do this experiment a couple of times with my students where I give them another chance to now look at the words. But I'm going to actually give you a tip that I wait and give my students a little bit later, but I'm going to give it to you now. When you look at the list again, I want you to look for an arrangement of those words. So they are arranged to a pattern, and if you can recognize the pattern, it might help you to memorize the words easier. So try looking at what the words say and see if there's a pattern. So now that you're looking at the list, you might be able to recognize the pattern that these are arranged to. The first one on the list, a dollar bill, so 1. Dice, we usually roll 2 dice. Tricycle has 3 wheels, right? A 4-leaf clover. So these now are starting to, they're able to make connections with things that you might be familiar with already. So now, if I were to ask you how many words or phrases could you remember from the list now, I'm sure that you can remember several more. And a lot of my students, after I've given them the full 30 seconds, they can almost remember all of them. A lot of them can. And at least 12. Most of them can remember at least 12 or recount at least 12 of them. So let's say that you got the 12 out of 15. Now your score is 80%. So you just improved your score from an F to a B. And a B is passing in my class. So how is it that just in a matter of minutes, you have improved your score that dramatically? Did I really make you that much smarter in just a couple of minutes? The answer is no, I didn't magically make you all that much more intelligent in the room just in a couple of minutes. But what really happened is there were a couple of main differences between the attempts. Obviously, the first main difference is you knew what the task was the second time around. And I will tell you that a lot of times when you're teaching and you give your students a task, they might not understand what that task really is. So you're going to tell them to go home and do certain homework problems in the text, and they get back to their home and they're not really sure what they're supposed to be doing. They don't really understand that maybe they need to preview the material, they need to practice a few problems first before that content is going to make sense. So when I say that they need to know what the task is, we need to be very clear as educators as to what task we want them to do. And when we give it to them, they clearly understand the expectations behind that task. And then the second difference was when I told you how the information was organized. That made a big difference for you, I'm sure. Now looking at the material, you're able to make connections with the words on the list and things that you are already very familiar with. And that's how your brain works, and that's how you're able to really memorize or understand the material better. So it's really all about the strategies. I just gave you a strategy. That's all I did, was give you a strategy for learning that material. And it really was able to engage your brain. And that's what we want to do for our students. So my question then is, if these strategies, even the one that I've given you so far, are so helpful for our students, why don't they have them already? Why don't they have some of these skills and these strategies when they come to our class? And the answer is, it's really not necessary usually to have some of those metacognitive skills when you're in high school. So I will ask a lot of students about their high school experience, and it might be different for the schools in your country, but here in the United States, it's not terribly difficult to be successful in high school. Students don't really need a very high level of learning when it comes to getting A's and being successful in high school. So when they come to college, they think that it's about the same, that they're not going to need to put in as much effort, if at all, as much as they put in high school. So when I'm talking about that level of learning, again, it's that Bloom's taxonomy. So you can see on this slide, Bloom's taxonomy is a level of learning. It's how well you understand a certain content or a certain topic. And you can see that each level of the pyramid builds on itself, and the higher that you get on the pyramid, the more you really understand the content. So just glancing at the bottom of that pyramid, you can see the base is remembering. This is the memorization part. And in truth, in math, there are formulas and terms that you do have to memorize. And I expect my students to memorize some of those things. So there is a foundation of knowledge there that you need before you can move higher up on the pyramid. So that's the basic. And then as you go to the next level, you get to a greater understanding. Here's where you can construct some meaning behind those terms and definitions. And then as you go further up, we have application. Can you apply those concepts to something else outside of that one problem? And then further up, we have analyzing, breaking that content down into smaller parts. And this is kind of where you might be able to explain the material more to someone else that doesn't have a great understanding of the content. And then we move to evaluating. Can you make judgments as to whether or not what you've done is correct? Here is where the students can find their own mistakes. This is a key level. When you have worked through a problem and you can find your mistake, that's when you are really starting to understand what's going on in the process. And that last level is creating. And I'm sure that educators like you are familiar with this level, and that is creating your own problems. When you have to sit down and write a test, that's when you really start to understand how that content relates to other content, right? So that ability to write your own problems is really the highest level of learning that we can have for any given content. So if this is our model for our students, a lot of times I will ask them, what level did you operate at in high school? And students that I have worked with have said, really, the bottom level, the bottom two levels maybe even up to applying, but those are in their harder, more advanced high school classes. And then I ask them, okay, so what level do you think you need to be working at college? What level do you think that we should expect from our college students? And here's where, surprisingly, they say, yeah, we should be at the top. We should be in evaluating, creating, because we're in college now, right? So they expect that challenge. They expect us to give them that higher level of learning. And they want it. They want to be challenged. So our goal as educators is to take the content and deliver it in a way that they can move higher up on those levels of learning. So a couple of things that we know now about learning. Active learning is more lasting than passive learning. If you can actively engage your students and make connections, they're going to remember that material for a longer period of time. Thinking about their own thinking, being able to look at themselves as problem solvers, ask themselves their own questions, and then be able to go from there. And then, of course, the level at which learning occurs is going to be important. I'm going to do another experiment with you here. This is going to show the importance of active reading. On the next slide, I'm going to give you a passage, and I want you to really focus in on this passage and read through the material as much as you can and try to understand the topic. Try to understand what is being talked about in this next slide, so that if I were to ask you after what the information is about, you could retell it to me in your own words. So I'm going to give you, again, about 30 seconds, read through the material and really try to understand what is it talking about. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to at least read through the words. Now, at this point, I will ask my students, can you tell me what that passage is about? And I get a lot of blank looks here. A lot of students are laughing and looking at me like, I have no idea what I just read. And I'm guessing you probably are feeling the same way, especially with a language barrier, right? This passage right now probably doesn't mean anything to you. So now I'm going to actually tell you what the heading of this passage is. I'm going to give you the title and see if it helps. So this passage is actually regarding Christopher Columbus. So it's entitled The First Voyage of Christopher Columbus. If you are familiar with Christopher Columbus at all, now this passage hopefully maybe is starting to make some sense. If you read through it again, you might now understand what the three sturdy sisters are. You might also recognize what he means when he said it was an egg, not a table, right? So he's telling us that the world is round, not flat. So now some of those phrases are starting to jump out at you and mean a lot more. And now my students are at this point going, oh yeah, that makes sense. Now this passage means something to me. And all I did from the first read to the second read is give them the title. And as soon as they have something to base all of the information off of, now it means more to them. Sorry. So that really is showing us the power of previewing the material, getting some basic idea of what you're going to be learning. So getting topic headings. When we ask students to read through some content in a math book, which immediately that scares them already, right? But if we ask them to first preview the material that they're going to be doing, look at the headings, get an idea of what you're learning about. That really is giving them an opportunity to build a structure. So it's like putting the bones in first, and then when you come to class, you can put the meat on the bones. So it's giving you a chance to take that material in and put it somewhere. Your brain makes connections, that's how it learns. So if it doesn't have anywhere for that new material to go, it's not going to stick. So you need a place for that new material to connect. And so if you can give them that basic overview or encourage them to do the previewing before they come to class, that will give them a chance to really take the information in the first time. Rather than a lot of times we get those students where that information just coming in one ear and going out the other. It's not stopping anywhere because they don't have anywhere to put it. They don't know what it relates to anything else. So we talked about Bloom's taxonomy and moving higher on that level of learning. Another method or tool that we can give our students to help them move higher up is to use the study cycle. This is another tool that was given by Dr. McGuire in her book, and I'm going to share that with you. It is a process by which our students can study. A lot of times our students do not know how to study. We will say, go prepare for this exam, and they will sit down and really not get anywhere. They might glaze over the material. They're probably checking their phones every couple of minutes. They think they're studying, and they're not. They're spending hours and hours, and none of that material is sinking in. So this is a slide that gives a specific process for studying, what they can do when they have that hour or two set aside to prepare for some assessment that's coming up. How would they use that time? So you can see that the first thing is that preview. That's the important part that we just mentioned. Preview the material before they come to class. Look through the notes and decide, what are we going to be talking about today? Then, of course, a key step is to attend class. We need them there. It's really hard for us to teach them and get them to a point that we want them in their learning if they're not there. So they need to go to class. And the next step is also important, and that is the review. After class, we need our students to review the material as close to right after class as possible. So within at least 24 hours of getting that lecture, they need to go back and review what they've learned. If they wait till the next day to review that material, most of it will have been lost, and it will be a wasted lecture for them because they will have forgotten what they went over in class. So it's really important that maybe just a couple hours after class, they go back and review that material and decide, okay, which parts of those do I remember and which parts are not as clear to me now that I've looked back a second time. And then, of course, we have these intense study sessions. You can see down at the bottom, it has an explanation of what an intense study session looks like. For a student, when they sit down to have one of these intense study sessions, they need to set a goal. What is their goal for this session? Because just sitting and glazing over the material for hours on end is not going to accomplish anything. Set a goal. Today, during this hour, I want to learn this. And then study with focus. Really focus in on that material. No distractions, right? Put their phones away and really focus on that material. And I also encourage my students to reward themselves. After they've gone about an hour of intense study, go get an ice cream, go pick up a drink, reward yourself for working hard. And then review again. You'll notice that reviewing again and again is really going to increase that understanding. Have you ever watched a movie, any movie, more than one time? I'm sure that you have, and the second time that you watched that movie, you probably got more out of it. And even a third time. If you're like my husband, you might not like watching a movie a second time, but I like rewatching movies, especially if it's one that I've enjoyed. I'll rewatch it a couple of times, and each time I'm enjoying it a little bit differently. And that's kind of how we can treat the content in a given course, especially in math. The more we see it, the more it's going to really make connections with what we've already learned. So the more times we can review and go back over that material, the better. And then, of course, the last part of this study cycle is the assessment. That's where we are giving them an opportunity to assess their knowledge. And they can actually create their own assessments, right? We talked about being higher up on that Bloom's taxonomy model. If they can create their own questions and answer their own questions, they will be a lot more prepared for whatever test you create. So being able to write their own tests is a great skill. Another strategy that you might offer to your students is how to do homework. A lot of students, at least ones that I have worked with in math, they sit down to do their homework, and immediately when they get a problem they don't know how to do, they start looking at the textbook and looking for step-by-step instructions immediately on how to work a problem. And so already they're getting in a habit of checking a resource, finding other ways to work the problem outside of their own knowledge and understanding. So already they're starting to depend on other resources. And if they continue to do that, when they get in the testing environment, they're not going to be able to work a problem on their own. So it's really important to stress to your students when they're doing their homework, you want to be able to work that homework without getting extra help. Once you can work through a problem step by step without looking in the back for the answer, then you know you're ready and you've prepared accurately. So what I ask my students to do when they're doing their homework, as they're working through a problem, if they get stuck, rather than immediately turn to that solutions manual or immediately go to someone for help, their goal is to actually try to find their own mistake. Try to look back and see, what can I do? How could I solve this? Do I have any previous knowledge that I can apply here to help me work this problem? So it's really important for them to use those metacognitive skills and see if they can come up with a solution. Maybe go back into their notes and read through some of the content again. But it's important for them to keep trying for at least 15-20 minutes. If they're spending over an hour and they really can't figure it out, then we know they need to turn to outside resources and get that extra help. But then they should make a note that they can't do that on their own, and they will need to keep studying until they can. So once they can work through homework problems without looking at their book, then they know they're ready for the test. And we also talked about being able to find your own mistakes. When you can do that, really shows that you are understanding the content. So a couple of things that we have talked about already. Effective metacognitive strategies. We want to strive for higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. We want to use active reading strategies and really bring those out in our classrooms and encourage our students to be actively engaged in the material. Do homework assignments without using examples or the textbook information. Prepare as if you have to teach the material. We're always working to be able to share that information in a teaching setting, then we know we're ready to be assessed. Use the study cycle with intense study sessions. I also tell my students to aim for 100% mastery. And again, this might be different in your schools, but here a lot of times our students, when they come across a topic that they don't understand, it's usually the word problems or the story problems, they just assume, it's okay, I'm not going to learn that one. I probably won't be tested on it. Or if I do, it's okay, I can miss one. And sure enough, those are the ones that are on the test, and sure enough, they miss them. And so I tell my students, don't aim for 90%, aim for 100. Aim to understand everything that you can. If you come across a topic that you don't know how to do, more than likely that's going to be on the test. And you should research it and seek out help so that you understand that content. And also adopt a growth mindset. We're going to talk about that now regarding intelligence. So for this next part of my presentation, I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about your amazing brain. Now, this is coming from the latest research in brain science and in growth mindset. It was introduced by Carol S. Dweck in her book on mindset. And this is another great resource for educators. So my question for you now is, how intelligent are you? How smart do you think you are on a scale from 1 to 10? Could you give yourself a number? And once you've decided how intelligent you think you are, has your intelligence changed over time? Do you think that number has improved over the last couple years or several years or since you were a child? Can it change in the future? This number that you've given yourself, is it set from now on? Is that how intelligent you will be? Can it change in the future? So are people who you think are successful, or you might call them successful, are they more intelligent than the ones that aren't successful? So these are a couple of questions that are going to really help us talk about mindset and how we feel intelligence is developed and whether or not it is static or whether or not we can change it. So I did ask you, do you think that your intelligence can change? And I'm hoping that you answered yes. I'm hoping that you were thinking, yes, my intelligence has changed in the past, and I believe my intelligence can change in the future. I think that if I put in effort, I can develop my intelligence further. So it turns out that the key to intelligence and what we would call being smart is really going to be based on hard work, focus, persistence, and our ability to really want to grow that intelligence. Because intelligence, aside from what some people might think, is not predetermined. I get a lot of students that, especially in math, they will say, I'm just not a math person. I just don't have a math brain. So they think that they immediately are not meant to learn math. It's just not their thing. And I would ask you, why do you think that they have that belief? Why do they believe, I'm just not a math person? And the problem there is that they feel like their intelligence is predetermined, that at least in the math area, that they were predetermined not to be a math person. And the truth is that is completely false. No one is born knowing math. No one is born lacking the ability to do math, right? No one can just automatically do math when they're first born. Everyone has to learn it. So if we want to be successful, we need to start thinking differently. And of course, the we here that I'm talking about is our students. A lot of our students have this set belief that they are not math people, and we need to give them the knowledge that everyone can do math. Everyone can do a topic outside of math, whatever they choose, if they really put in the effort. We are not chained to specific capabilities. So I'm actually going to share a short video with you.
Nobody's born smart. We all start at zero. Can't talk, can't walk, certainly can't do algebra. Adding, reading, writing, riding a bike? Nobody's good at anything at first. There was a time when Einstein couldn't count to 10. And Shakespeare had to learn his ABCs just like the rest of us. Thankfully, we're born to learn. Slowly, surely, you stumble, slip, crawl, fall, and fail and fall. Frustrating, confusing, trying, struggling, until one day, you walk. One foot in front of the other, one idea on top of the next, each wrong answer making your brain a little bit stronger. Failing is just another word for growing, and you keep going. This is learning. Knowing that you'll get it, even if you haven't gotten it yet. Because the most beautiful, complex concepts in the whole universe are built on basic ideas that anyone, anywhere, can understand. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you only have to know one thing. You can learn anything.
Okay, so hopefully by watching that video, you can see that everyone can learn anything they want if they put in enough effort. Have you ever learned something that is really hard to learn? When I think about this for myself, I once took piano lessons. I actually took piano lessons for 2 years, and it was hard, mainly because if I didn't practice, I just would sit back to the piano and I couldn't do anything. The more I practiced, the more engaging and fun it became. But I would go a week at a time without sitting down to practice. And by the time I came back, I had forgotten what I had been working on the week before. So a couple of things there that I learn is that persistence is key. If you really want to learn something, you have to put in the effort, and you have to be willing to persist even when it's hard. And that's something that our students need to learn as well. Not everything is going to come easy and natural. And a lot of times that math is one of those barriers for students where they feel like it's just too hard. But I tell my students often that you can learn it. You might have to put in more effort than your neighbor, but if you really want to learn and you focus in and you put in persistent effort, you can learn it. So we want to give our students as many strategies and as many tools as we can to help them be successful and encourage them to grow their intelligence. So many people think that the brain is a mystery. They don't know much about intelligence and how it works. What they do think about intelligence is that you're either born smart, average, or dumb, and that's how it stays the rest of your life. But research shows that the brain is actually like a muscle. It changes and it gets stronger when you use it. Scientists have been able to show how the brain grows and gets stronger as you learn and as you make connections. Here's a picture of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the largest region of the cerebrum, and it plays a key role in memory, attention, perception, cognition, awareness, thought, language, and consciousness. So communication between these brain cells, which the brain cells, this is your nerve cells called neurons, and they have branches that connect to other cells. It's a very complicated network, but the communication between these brain cells allows you to think and to solve problems. I'm going to share another quick video with you. This video is hopefully going to explain a little bit more about brain science than I could.
You would not be here if you weren't interested in learning, and neither would I. But here's something we haven't learned about together. Learning. The ways in which we acquire and retain knowledge, which is the very definition of learning, is really a science in itself, and like any other discipline that involves the study of the human brain, is practically still in its infancy. Just 20 years ago, most scientists believed that once we reached adulthood, our brains were pretty much fixed. Not that we were incapable of learning anything new exactly, but the assumption was that our brain's development phase was over, and now it's pretty much there to remind our hearts to keep beating and occasionally let us remember where we left our phone. But thanks to huge advances in things like functional brain imaging, we have a clearer picture than ever of how our brains work, and we're beginning to observe some wonderful things. For one, we now know that the process of learning actually alters the structure of our brains at the cellular level. And what's more, it turns out that our brains never stop changing to make room for new information. People often compare the human brain to a computer, but imagine a computer that could actually grow new circuits as it acquires new facts and associations, and you have a much more awesome comparison. This is the gift known as neural plasticity. You might think of plastic as being stiff and cheap, but in biology, plasticity refers to the capacity of living things to mold themselves to new conditions, and our brains are great at it. For one thing, your brain cells, or neurons, are always changing their connections to one another to meet changing demands. Each of your neurons consists of a central body with spindly dendrites and a long axon stemming from it. The neuron transmits electrochemical signals to other brain cells through its axon and receives signals through its dendrites via connections where the cells cells meet, called synapses. When you're born, each neuron in your brain has about 2,500 synapses connecting it to other cells. But by the time you're 3, and you've become just a sponge of fascinating new information, like what sound a piggy makes and where your mom's face goes when she hides it behind her hands, you have 6 times as many, up to 15,000 synapses for each neuron in your brain. In this regard, it's kind of true that your brain hits its peak when you're young, because by the time you're an adult, your brain cells have about half as many synapses as when you were 3. But it turns out that's okay, because we now know that synapses just shrink up when they're no longer needed. Like, you know now that pigs go oink and that people still exist when you can't see their faces, so you don't need to keep those connections to remind you. This process of winnowing down unused connections is known as synaptic pruning. Meanwhile, your neurons experience all kinds of new growth as you continue to soak up new information, like how to drive, how to solve for X, and how to get through that one really hard level in your favorite castle smashing game. Here, the key to learning is memory, because you need to retain that information in order to apply it in the future. So your brain cells can change in different ways depending on how long you remember what you've learned. As you stockpile data in your short-term memory, for example, the structure of your existing synapses has been found to change, with more and stronger dendrites growing to reinforce them. So for info that you retain for just a short time, like how to destroy digital castles using rocks and fire, you don't need to sprout whole new connections. Just beefing up the existing ones you've used so far will help you master the game just fine. But when it comes to important stuff like the learning we do at school, or hopefully the stuff you learn here on SciShow, your neurons actually forge entirely new synapses over time as you relearn, re-remember, and reuse the information. This is how your brain builds the long-term memory you need to retain the learning you're doing right now at work and at school, and turn it into a lifetime of applied knowledge. So I said it before, and I'll say it again. Take care of your brain, and odds are, it'll take care of you. Thanks for watching this SciShow Dose, brought to you by Intel Education. Follow them on Twitter at IntelEDU, and visit them at the link below. If you have any questions or ideas for us, we're in the comments and on Facebook and Twitter. And if you want to keep getting smarter with us, you can go to youtube.com/SciShow and subscribe.
So hopefully, I know that video gives a lot of deep information about the brain, but it does kind of remind you that the brain is a complicated network, and we can grow those connections and make new ones. So I want to show you a picture, a couple of pictures here. You can see the 2 different pictures. The one on the left is a picture of a child's brain when they are first born. And you can see that there are connections, a few dendrites and neurons, but then you can see the picture on the right has a lot more connections. And this is just a picture of the same brain at age 6. So children, when they start out as babies, they don't know very much, right? They can't talk, they can't walk, but we can see as they practice and listen and learn and start learning to talk and do other things, their brain is building new, stronger connections and making that child smarter or growing their intelligence and stronger. This is also another picture of brain research that's been done on animals. You can see the one on the left is a picture of a brain of an animal that was in a bear cage. No connections, nothing to engage them. And then the picture on the right is a picture of the same animal now in a cage with an enriched environment where they had other animals. They were living with toys and things that they could interact with. So the more connections they were able to make, the smarter, more connections in their brain, heavier, and more connections that they made. So what can our students do to strengthen their synapses and to get what we would say smarter or more intelligence? We want them to focus on learning. We talked about minimizing distractions. Generate meaningful connections. If they can connect the new material with content that they are already familiar with, that they've already built a strong connection in their brain, they'll be able to make that new connection to previous learning. And a lot of times, if you can attach emotion behind your learning, you will be able to pull that information back again more often. When you think about your fondest memories or things that have happened to you that you remember the most, that you have the most vivid details of, it usually has some emotional connection, whether it was a really enjoyable moment, really exciting, and you were really happy, or it was one of the less wonderful times. Maybe it was a time where you were really struggling, or it was painful, a painful emotional memory for you. You can see that those emotions really make deeper connections. So if you can attach emotion to learning, it's going to be more accessible for you. And space out learning over a period of time. Consistency is key. Reviewing material one time is not going to keep that connection strong, and that synaptic pruning will happen, and that material will just shrink up and you won't be able to recall it later. So repetition and constantly using that same neuron, that same connection to retrieve that information, and you'll have it later. We start as children wanting to learn everything. Infants, when they are born, they stretch their skills daily, and not just ordinary skills, right? Babies are learning the most difficult tasks of their lives. They're learning to walk and to talk, but they never decide at some point, you know what, I've fallen down too many times, I'm just not going to learn to walk. It's just not for me. I'm just not a walking person, right? They don't ever do that. Everyone continues to persist no matter how many times they've fallen down. As a child, that's something they want to learn, and they don't want to give up. And so if our students will take that same approach to math, no matter how many times they have failed, they can keep trying, and they eventually can learn that material. We might ask, what puts an end to that excitement and the love of learning that children have? Have you ever watched a toddler as they're learning to walk or they're learning to talk? They have an excitement and a joy of learning, and they want to keep trying. And why is it that sometimes as adults we don't have that, or as children grow and get older, they lose that excitement for learning? And through a multiple of studies, we found that it's everything to do with mindset, and this thought that they all of a sudden believe that they have reached their potential and that they can't or don't want to learn anything else. And that is the difference between fixed and growth mindset. So this term was actually coined by Carol Dweck in her book in the last 15 years or so. I just have time to give you a couple of definitions on the difference between fixed and growth mindset. Fixed mindset, these people that have a fixed mindset tend to believe that intelligence is fixed. You can't grow it. You're either smart or you're not smart. Talent is predetermined. Sometimes my oldest daughter has a little bit of fixed mindset when it comes to a sport. She might think, oh, I'm just, I wasn't made to do that sport. I'm not going to practice because I'm not initially perfect and good at it, so I must not be meant to play that sport. And that's not true either. Some people are born with extra abilities as far as their traits and their abilities, but talent is not predetermined, and you can develop any skill if you really work hard at it. Fixed mindset people also feel like whatever you lack, you will continue to lack. If you have a growth mindset, obviously the opposite is true, that your intelligence can be developed. Your innate qualities are just the starting points, and success is the fruit of effort, learning, and persistence. Your abilities are developed through hard work and dedication. With it relates to learning, if you have a let me go back. How much time do I have, since I'm obviously messing up here anyways? The time? Okay. So with it relating to learning, fixed mindset believes that you want to look smart at all costs. So whatever you have to do to portray that intelligence, you want people to think that you're smart. And if you have a growth mindset, you want to learn at all costs. You're okay to make mistakes, and it's okay if people see you fail because you're learning, and that's part of learning. If you have a fixed mindset, you focus on the answers and the grades, and not about the learning itself. You really just want to get that grade, and some of our students unfortunately do really only care about that grade. We want to provide them with the ability to grow and learn, and we want them to focus more on the content and being able to take that knowledge with them past the grade. I'm going to skip through a couple of things, but you are welcome to look back at these slides and see more with relation to fixed and growth mindset and how it relates to effort and to challenges. One thing I'll point out with challenges, again, if you have a fixed mindset, you are trying to hide your mistakes. And if you have a growth mindset, you are going to capitalize on those mistakes. When you make mistakes, you are happy and you're excited because now you have a chance to learn. So with that, I want to talk about our last thing. Actually, never mind. I have one more thing. So before we talk about the power of mistakes, which is what I want to end on, I do want to give you some tips on how we can change our mindset. How we might, if we feel like we have a fixed mindset, how could we change that? We talked about mindset being a belief that our abilities are developed through our observations of the world, ourselves, and people around us. When other people believe that our abilities are fixed, they tend to say and do things that reflect those beliefs. So it's important that we want to praise our students on the effort and not the results. So this also applies to children, and I try really hard to do the same for my own kids. When they accomplish a task, if I praise them on the results and what they were able to develop as the finished product, they want to do more finished products perfectly. They really want that result because they were receiving the praise on that. But if I praise them instead for their effort and how hard they worked, they are actually more willing to try harder things, even if they think they might accomplish that same perfect result that they might think is what they're looking for. Instead, they want to persist and they want a challenge because I'm praising them on their hard work, and so they want to keep working hard. So I try really hard to do the same thing for my kids as I do for my students. Praise them on that persistence and the hard work rather than the A or the result. So the question you might be asking is, can we grow or change our mindset? Can we develop this growth mindset? And the answer is yes, we can. If you think that your mindset is more fixed than you would like, and you've been thinking, oh, sometimes I don't like to try hard things, or sometimes I think that I can't do something, I'm going to give you a couple of tips that you can use to change your mindset, or that you can give your students to help change their mindset. The first one is learn to hear when you are giving a fixed mindset voice. That voice that tells you, I can't do this, or this is too hard, I can't learn this. Those are the phrases, that's the voice that is giving you that fixed mindset, and you need to learn to switch it around. I can't learn this yet. I haven't learned this yet. I can do this if I will keep trying. Recognize that you do have a choice. You have a choice in your learning, whether or not you want to keep trying or you want to give up. And talk back to that growth mindset. Talk back to the fixed mindset and give it that growth mindset, right? And then take the growth mindset action. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and be willing to keep persisting in the face of failure. So the last thing I want to cover is talking about mistakes. I've talked a lot about the power of mistakes, making mistakes. What happens when your brain makes a mistake? And we talked about those connections and those firing of those neurons in your brain, and it happens the most when you're making a mistake. And it turns out that your brain actually knows you've made a mistake before you realize that you've made that mistake. So have you ever walked out the door to leave your house and you think, oh man, I feel like I'm forgetting something? You have that feeling like, oh, I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I don't know what it is. That's that firing that's happening in your brain that's saying you've made a mistake, and it's trying to give you that message. And usually that's me driving off saying, oh, yep, I did. I forgot my phone or something. So those are the kinds of things that we want to watch for, because those are really great messages that our brain is trying to send us, that we can learn and we can grow and we can fix that connection that maybe is a mistake that we've been making. So there really is power in mistakes. I like to ask my students before we begin the semester, at the beginning, I like to ask them if they feel like mistakes are a good thing or a bad thing. And I will tell you that almost everyone that I ask in my class will say, yeah, mistakes are a good thing. Yeah, they're a good thing. They intuitively know mistakes are good. And I ask them, why? Why would you say that mistakes are good? And things that they tell me are, you can learn from your mistakes, right? You can correct them. When you make a mistake, you can fix it. The number one answer I usually get is, you never make the same mistake twice, right? Have you ever made a mistake on a test and you're like, I'm not going to make that mistake again, right? We don't usually make those same mistakes twice. That's because our brain has really sent those messages and we have emotion behind it so that we fix it the next time. And mistakes are an opportunity for us to learn where our mind tends to go wrong. A lot of times in math, there is a consistent mistake in any given student. Maybe they consistently forget a negative, or they consistently forget to reduce a fraction. Those are the kinds of things that they should be looking for, because their brain has a tendency to do the same kinds of things. It wants to be efficient, and it wants to do the same thing it's always been doing. And so how we learn is to train it to do something different. And if it's doing something we don't want it to do, we have to train our brain to make that change. And then my students will also tell me mistakes are good on homework, right? Because then we can fix our mistakes on the homework and we don't lose as many points when it's on the homework. So they're okay if they make mistakes there, right? What they don't like is when they make mistakes on the test or the assessment. I get a lot of students after a test that will say, oh, I just made careless mistakes on that test. I wish I could take that back. And it turns out that there are actually no such thing as careless mistakes. They really only look careless when you look back at them, right? In retrospect, when we look back, we think, well, I knew that. That was a silly mistake. Why did I do that? It turns out that mistakes are things that have to be made. Our brain is going to make those in order to learn. So our goal is to make those mistakes early, when it's not going to hurt us as much, right? We want to encourage our students to make those mistakes in the homework, early in the learning process, so that they can fix it before they reach that assessment time. But making those mistakes, they have to happen. It's part of the learning. You don't actually learn anything if you did the entire assignment correctly. You didn't learn, you already knew it. So when you're making those mistakes, that's when you're growing and learning. Mistakes are a really great thing. So mistakes give us a chance for our brains to grow, and we really only learn through that trial and error. So in conclusion, I just want to talk to you about a couple of things that we have gone over today. Remember that we want to teach our students how to learn and to stay in learn mode, to study smarter, not harder. We're not asking our students to spend more hours studying. We're just asking them to be more efficient in their studying, to really make those study hours count, focus in and make sure that they are using that time efficiently. Also, remember not to judge our students initially on their potential. Sometimes it is hard not to have students come in that first day and immediately start thinking, oh, that student's not going to do well, this student's going to do well. We really want to try not to do that, not to label our students as intelligent or not intelligent, or someone that's going to succeed and someone that's not, because ultimately they all can succeed if they will put in the effort, right? So we don't want to judge them initially. And even on their first performance, their first tests, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, they're not going to do well. But it's actually an opportunity for us to say, those students that didn't do well on that first test, those are the ones we want to focus in on and really give them the strategies that they need to be successful. And some of those strategies that we talked about today, you can share with your students. Share with them the Bloom's taxonomy model. A lot of educators have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but they don't share it with their students. And when I give that model to my students, it's almost like eye-opening for them to see that, oh, there is higher levels of learning, and if I can put in effort, I can grow and be able to build on that pyramid. So don't be afraid to share some of those things with your students. And also remember, encourage your students to persist in failure, in the face of failure. If they are making those mistakes or they are not doing as well as they would like, encourage them to keep going, because it just means they haven't mastered it yet, but they can. And encourage the use of metacognitive tools, some of those that we talked about today, those active reading strategies, previewing the material, and also really understanding whether or not they have taken in the material or if they're just memorizing. We want them to really make connections and be able to apply it later. So thank you for joining me today, and I hope that I've given you a couple of tips that might help you in your future classrooms, and I hope you have a wonderful success.